The summer heat wrapped around the city like a suffocating blanket, making sleep elusive. My mom and I lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the ground floor of a quiet complex. Although I had my own room, I preferred the comfort of sleeping in her bed whenever I stayed with her. It was a habit I never questioned, a small comfort in the sprawling silence of the night. Our bedrooms sat at the end of a narrow hallway directly across from each other. That night, my mom had left the window in her room open, inviting a faint warm breeze that barely disturbed the stifling air. The window was positioned directly above the headboard, where the gauzy curtains swayed softly against the summer night. I don't remember what woke me, but I found myself sitting up in bed, the faint glow of a street lamp spilling into the room. My gaze drifted toward the open doorway, where our cat sat motionless in the frame. He was a creature of habit, usually curled up at the foot of our bed, but now he perched at the threshold staring into the darkness of the hallway. His fur bristled slightly, his tail twitching with a quiet unease. He turned his head to me, his eyes reflecting the dim light, and let out a single, sharp meow before sauntering into my bedroom across the hall. His behavior sent a ripple of unease down my spine. Something felt off. I reached over and shook my mom awake. "Mom," I whispered urgently, my voice trembling. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "What is it?" she asked groggily, her voice laced with concern. Before I could respond, both of us turned our eyes back to the doorway. My breath hitched. There, standing in the shadows of my open door, was a man. He moved with an unsettling calm, stepping out of my room and into the hallway. In the dim light, I could make out the vague shape of his figure, but his face was obscured, a silhouette of menace against the backdrop of my room. In a blur of movement, my mom's instincts took over. Without hesitation, she grabbed me and threw me toward the open window above the bed. I landed outside with a soft thud on the grass below, the cool night air sharp against my skin. Moments later, she followed, her landing more urgent. "Run!" she commanded, her voice trembling but firm. We bolted toward the nearest neighbor's door, banging and screaming until lights flickered on and the sound of hurried footsteps approached. Someone called 911, and within minutes, the police arrived, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows on the apartment complex. Despite their thorough search, the intruder was gone. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door had been unlocked, a fact that baffled my mom. She insisted she'd locked it, deadbolt and chain, before we went to bed. The police could only speculate, suggesting that the man had exited through the front door after we escaped. A week later, as my mom was cleaning the kitchen, she made a chilling discovery. The small water heater closet, usually ignored, was slightly ajar. Inside, she found a notebook filled with names and crude drawings. Alongside it was a pair of gloves and some discarded gum wrappers. The police were called again, but their findings were inconclusive. The evidence suggested the man had been in our apartment, possibly hiding there for hours, maybe even days, before making his presence known. The thought was sickening, a violation of the sanctuary we called home. We moved out shortly after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, of the walls themselves harboring secrets. Even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers, a shadow in the back of my mind. The man's face remains a blank in my memory, but his presence is unforgettable, a reminder of how quickly safety can shatter and how courage often rises from the most primal of fears. But the story didn't end there. Months later, I began having recurring nightmares of the man, his shadowed face now vivid in my dreams. My mom brushed it off as lingering trauma, but then strange things began happening in our new home. Doors that were locked at night would be found ajar in the morning. Scratches appeared on the inside of the windowsill in my room, faint but deliberate, like fingernails dragged across the wood. One night, while unpacking an old box, my mom froze. Inside was the notebook from the water heater closet. She swore she had handed it over to the police, but here it was, the same crude drawings and a new name scrawled at the bottom. Hers. The realization hit us like a wave. He wasn't just in our old apartment. He had followed us. That night, we barricaded ourselves in her bedroom, clutching knives, hearts pounding with every creak and groan of the house. Around 3 a.m., we heard it, a soft tapping on the window, deliberate and rhythmic. When we dared to peek, the silhouette of a man was pressed against the glass, his face obscured but his presence unmistakable. The police were called again, but like before, he vanished before they arrived. The only evidence he left behind was a faint handprint smeared on the glass and a chilling note wedged under the door that read, "I'll always find you." We left town the next morning, leaving behind everything but the clothes on our backs. To this day, I can't sleep with the window open, and every creak of the floorboard sends my heart racing. Some nights, I still feel his gaze, like a shadow that refuses to fade. A ghost of a man who lives not in memory but in the spaces between the walls, waiting. I was 12 when the horror unfolded. A memory burned into my mind like a scar. It was the kind of story whispered about in hushed tones long after, the one that turns your stomach and chills your bones. My life changed that winter, a week before Christmas. When I was 10, I moved in with my dad, leaving behind everything familiar. The new neighborhood was alien to me, except for the family my dad was friends with. A single mom with 3 kids lived just a few houses away. Among them was Emily, a girl 2 years older than me. We weren't particularly close, but we shared mutual friends and occasionally hung out. Her younger brother, Noah, was an energetic 9-year-old who idolized his sister. Their mom, Linda, worked long hours at a local care facility, often leaving them alone in the evenings. One of our mutual friends, Rob, was at their house that night. He wasn't supposed to be there. Linda was strict about rules, but rules had a way of bending for teenagers. They played music and talked, the kind of carefree chatter that fills the air when the adults are away. Noah tagged along, flitting in and out of the room as younger siblings do. None of them could have anticipated the knock at the door. It came sharply, 3 deliberate raps. Emily paused the music and glanced at the clock. "It's probably Mom," she said, heading for the door. Linda had a distinct knock, a rhythm Emily had learned to recognize, and she opened the door without hesitation. The moment stretched into silence. Then Rob's voice cut through. "That's not your mom," he said, his voice tense. Standing in the doorway was a woman, disheveled and gaunt, her eyes glassy with a manic intensity. Emily froze as the stranger pushed her way inside. Rob's survival instincts kicked in. He bolted, climbing out the window and sprinting down the street to his house. He didn't look back, assuming it was just a minor disturbance. But Noah, wide-eyed and terrified, hid behind the couch, watching as the woman advanced on his sister. Her movements were erratic, her voice a strange mix of pleading and anger. "Where's your mother?" the woman demanded, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. Emily stammered, stepping back toward the kitchen. Noah seized his chance, darting out the front door and racing to the neighbors, screaming for help. By the time the police arrived, the house was unnervingly silent. What they found inside was the stuff of nightmares. Emily's body lay in the bathtub, her lifeless form pale against the porcelain. The brutality defied comprehension. She had been decapitated, her head hidden somewhere in the house. The officers searched methodically, their faces grim as they sifted through the wreckage of what should have been a sanctuary. They eventually found it, concealed among the carefully wrapped Christmas presents under the tree. The woman, as it turned out, was the sister of one of Linda's patients. Linda had been helping her through her work, unaware that the woman had recently been released from a mental institution. Conversations with her sister had revealed Linda's schedule and home address, information the woman used to plan her unhinged act of violence. The aftermath was a blur of grief and confusion. The neighborhood buzzed with fear, parents clutching their children a little tighter. Linda's house stood vacant for weeks, the shadows inside seemingly alive with the echoes of what had happened. Rob was consumed with guilt, haunted by what-ifs. Noah, once so full of life, withdrew into himself, his childhood shattered. I wasn't allowed to attend Emily's funeral. My dad said it was for the best, but I've always wondered if it was his way of shielding me from the weight of reality. Instead, I sat in my room, staring at the walls, replaying the fragments of the story I knew. But the horror didn't stop there. Weeks later, Linda's vacant house became a morbid attraction for thrill-seeking teenagers. They whispered about strange noises and claimed to see shadows moving in the windows. One boy, daring to explore, found a small notebook tucked into a crevice near the water heater. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, names, and unsettling drawings, including a crude depiction of a Christmas tree with something hidden beneath it. The woman was in custody, but her madness lingered like a stain, seeping into the fabric of our lives. For years, I couldn't walk past that house without feeling a heavy, suffocating dread. It was as if the tragedy had left an indelible mark, a scar on the neighborhood itself. Even now, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, my heart racing, convinced I hear 3 deliberate knocks at the door. The memories never truly fade, and neither does the fear.